My life was just burning to the ground. And once I got out of the second treatment center, I had been in there for 4 months, and I realized, okay, you definitely do feel better without drugs and alcohol in your system. But what are you going to do now? And I had no high school education. I was a dropout. I had no driver's license. I had no money.
Welcome everyone to another wonderful podcast. Now, you know what I've noticed? I never say my name. I can imagine for someone first listening to a podcast thinking, who's this geezer then? Who's that then? I always introduce everybody else, but never myself. Okay, so what I'm going to say is my name is Eli Devontae. That's who it is. Eli Devontae is who's speaking right now. So I'll go back to speaking proper. Okay, I'm Eli Devontae, the host of the show, and I'm looking forward to speaking with Jess. Actually, Jess needs to be told. She was late for our original podcast earlier on in the day. Can you imagine? I'm the one that's supposed to be late. Can you imagine the gore of it? So anyway, we rescheduled, and she was early. Can you believe it? She was early. So not bad, Jess. Welcome, Jess. Welcome, Jess. How are you doing?
Thank you. After being shamed, I'm doing okay.
Good. I'm glad you're not red enough. So I think I'm going to have to say a few more things because you're not like a cherry. So we'll see what I can come up with during the podcast.
It takes a lot to make me blush. So good luck.
Really? Is that a challenge? Did you hear that, listeners?
Yeah.
That's a challenge. Yeah. The interview. I'm interviewing her. She's challenging me. Oh, dear. This is going to be
I shared with you earlier, my father's British, so I used to have to wear like a bulletproof vest to Christmas dinner. So I know how to take it. I know how to dish it out, and I know how to take it.
Oh, did he give you the Brussels sprouts though?
What does that mean?
Oh, you don't know what he can't be British. Did you hear that, listeners? You British people, you know what Brussels sprouts are. They're horrible things. They're very bitter. They're like
like an actual Brussels sprout.
Yeah, I'm talking about. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought it was like a I don't know. I thought it was like a saying or like give you the Brussels sprouts. I don't know. No, of course. I like Brussels sprouts. I eat them
Jess, there's something wrong with you. Anybody that likes a Brussels sprouts, there is something. They must have been dropped on the head while they were.
Oh, I was.
Who could like a bitter Brussels?
Yeah.
Obviously, for you to be given Brussels sprouts, you were one naughty girl. Only parents that give naughty children Brussels sprouts. Trust me.
You know what I can't stand that's British, and I feel like a lot of Brits eat this, is peas.
Really?
Ugh.
I love peas. I never, as a child, I hated peas, but I must admit, I love peas now.
Nope. I like pea soup. That's the only pea thing I will eat, but actual just cooked, nope.
All right, okay. Well, it looks like we're having a podcast about food today. I don't know why. She's taken over. Now she's just talking about food. I don't know. Well, we'll just have to see if we can revert that. So, as always, as we do not know what you do, Jess, please tell us what you do to help your customers be successful in their journey, and we'll go with the flow.
Okay. I like that approach. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. I always love having these fun conversations with strangers on the internet in different time zones. So thank you for this opportunity. Mm-hmm. Would you like the long version or the short version?
Let's do the short version. I've heard your reputation. The long version tends to be a couple of hours, and we just can't do that, Jess. So keep it short, please.
Now you really sound like my dad. Okay, so what do I help people with? It has transformed over the years, but it originally started with me becoming sober from drugs and alcohol at a very young age. So I've actually been sober for almost 18 years now. I got sober at the age of 21 and kind of found myself in a position where I had to completely rebuild my life. And I had nothing at the time. I was placed in a second rehab. My life was just burning to the ground. And once I got out of the second treatment center, I had been in there for 4 months, and I realized, okay, you definitely do feel better without drugs and alcohol in your system, but what are you going to do now? And I had no high school education. I was a dropout. I had no driver's license. I had no money. I only had my parents' place to go back and live in, and it was just kind of like a rebuild journey. So at first I went back to like a high school adult education center and needed to get my diploma, and I was like, oh, that was kind of easy, and I did that, and then I applied to university and they let me in conditionally and got a tutor and kind of taught myself. I didn't have strong reading skills or writing skills, and taught myself how to do that. And then while I was in university, I got hired at the same treatment center that I was once a resident in. And it just started off like working at the front desk and doing like triage when new clients would come in, and I would search their belongings and things like that. And it kind of just progressed from there. And then as soon as I graduated, I was able to sit in on a lot of group therapy. So I would sit in on the groups at the treatment center. And then a few years later, I was running my own groups. And I got really passionate about, you see that often in the recovery world, is people who have had their own experience with drugs and alcohol and addiction issues. They often go into that field. So that's where I found myself in. So I did that for about 10 years. And then I started to get very passionate about a lot of the transfer addiction that was happening for myself, first of all, in recovery, where I found myself transferring to food to soothe myself, or spending, or over shopping, or over exercising, or compulsively dating, or whatever it was. It was a lot of my behaviors were still very addictive. Then I found out, I was like, oh, the problem was never drugs or alcohol. What's the actual problem? And that really kind of opened the floodgates to my real mental health journey. Yeah, so I started to, originally my coaching practice was actually helping women in and out of recovery, but work on their binge eating, because I was also a personal trainer. I've always been very interested in fitness. My father was a professional athlete and my brother is a professional athlete. So I came from a pretty healthy home. So at first it was really focused on fitness and nutrition and helping people stay away from binge eating. And then it really took more of a turn into relationships, codependency, attachment trauma. Just, it was this very cool process of the more I found out about myself and my healing journey and what was working and not working for me, I would blog about it along the way and kind of invite people along that journey. And then what I thought I was the only person struggling with certain things, the more I started to write about it, people were like, oh my God, that's exactly how I feel, or oh my God, me too, or can you help me? And my kind of coaching practice just blew up after that. Primarily now I help people understand their childhood at a much deeper level, and not from a place of blame or shame, or they did this wrong or this wrong. I mean, some people come from homes where there was, abuse or things like that, and they have to cut certain people off, and that's fine too. But mostly for people who want to understand their patterns, like if they experienced emotional neglect, then why is it that they're attracted to people who emotionally neglect them? So I run through a 10-week program with clients. We do a lot of psychoeducation around their attachment styles, why they behave the way they do, why they self-soothe. And we just unlock a lot of those doors that have been shut for a while. And started my own podcast along the way, so that's been super fun, and make social media content, and yeah, it's been a journey.
My God, Jess, I asked for the short version, not the long version.
That was, trust me, my friend, that was the short version.
Oh my God. Well, we might as well shut up shop now, because she just told it all. She's just spoilt it. I've got no story to give you, listeners. That's it. Let's leave.
Perfect.
No. Perfect.
Bye. See you.
Oh, now fighting gloves now. All right. Okay. Well, I got all that. I can fight back. Okay. So let's see. Right. So now we got you to a stage round about your 20s. You went through heavy addiction, and that was drugs and drink. But for that to happen, for you to be tipping over the edge, you had issues before that. So in your teens, you were quite unruly. Where does that come from? Go back with hindsight, and where did it start from?
Yeah, great questions. So yes, great point. I can only answer that in hindsight, because I did not understand what was happening at the time, nor did anybody else. So I was actually a good kid. I was very close with my parents. I was very involved in sports, but I was quite hyper and quite impulsive. And it was only around the teens, like 12, 13, where all of a sudden, if I didn't have soccer to focus on, or I didn't have certain things to focus on, I couldn't concentrate. I wasn't interested in school. I never wanted to be where I was. And I remember, well, my mom only told me this years later, but a best friend of mine's mother was a nurse, and the mother had told my mom that she thinks that I might have ADHD. But back then it wasn't really talked about that much. We definitely didn't talk about that stuff very much in my family home, because Brits aren't great with their emotions. So that was never really discussed.
Really?
And
keep that for yourself.
And so I think that was a huge factor. And unfortunately, that was only because also too, when I got sober, the recovery communities that I was in back then, and still I'm a part of now, and still firmly believe in, but it's a type of solution that will help you through your journey of addiction, and maybe help you process the bad things you did during addiction or whatever. It doesn't necessarily treat outside mental health issues. So it was actually only until I started to work at a psychology clinic in my early 30s, that my supervisor, in the middle of a meeting, asked me, she could pause me for a second, and she said, "Can I ask you a few questions? Do you feel comfortable if I do an assessment with you?" And it was out of the blue. And she started to run me through this ADHD assessment, which I didn't know was an ADHD assessment at the time. And she just started ticking all the boxes. And so at a much later age, I was diagnosed with ADHD, and it was a real gut punch at the time, because once I started to understand that better, I was able to connect a lot of the dots, and felt actually frustrated that maybe some of my struggles, not that I regret, well, maybe some things I regret, but maybe a lot of those struggles were because of the neurodivergence, and not necessarily just because I loved alcohol or cocaine that much.
Yeah,
you know?
No, definitely. I mean, it obviously stems from somewhere. That was just the alcohol and the drugs is always a reaction to something. Especially when it's a situation you cannot control the urge to have too much of it. You lose control. Now, most people know that, they've taken the alcohol, they've cut themselves, and that was taking it too far. And so people control that. But when you have a situation where you're trying to deal with something you feel that you don't have a handle on, then the alcohol or the drugs, as you know more than anyone else, is used as an abusive thing. And what tends to happen is also when the they move on from the alcohol and the drugs, it can turn into something else because they haven't dealt with the issue. So a lot of people think the problem was because they love the alcohol too much or the drugs too much, but it's not. The underpinning is the actual specific thing that happened in their life, which is triggering. So they leave one addiction, I should say, to another, be that food, be that anything else. It could be anything. And I suppose that's what you went through, because I think that's what you said, and you thought you had gone over it, but because you didn't deal with the core of the issue, that's why it triggered into another different addiction, and an addiction will lead to another addiction until you deal with the core of the issue. So saying that, when you was younger, obviously you're quite your brain moves my mother would say 9 noughts to the dozen. So your brain's always processing 24/7 and in multiple ways, and I can see that. You need to express yourself. You need to say, you can't stop, you can't slow down, it's got to be done, right? It's got to be expressed. Was you always like that as a kid, or has it got progressively worse, or has it just materialized late teens? Have you always been like that? Think as far back as you can, be it 4 years, 5 years, 6 years old, or did it materialize? Did it get worse? Did it progress?
Because my life continues to get bigger and fuller, I have way more things to focus on. So sometimes it actually might look like it's getting worse as I get older because of how full my life is. But at the same time, I have a lot more strategies to help me now. Whereas as a kid, I do remember always feeling terrified. So this sense of fear, even when I wasn't in situations that were fearful. So when I would wake up in the morning, as soon as I would open my eyes, the racing thoughts would start, like, what if this happens? Or what if you're late? Or what if something happens at school? So there was I remember experiencing a lot of fear as a child. And I also always needed to be like stimulated. Like I loved presents or going shopping or doing something new, or I was never just like, oh, let's just chill out and watch a movie, or let's just chill out and do nothing. Like, yeah, I was always a mover and a shaker, for sure.
Okay, so obviously the ADHD was always there, but you never knew it at the time. So looking back now with hindsight, you can see you was always a person that had to be always active. You was always thinking, you was always overthinking, underthinking. But where did the fear come from? Because you wasn't always fearful. So at the point of when you've noticed you started being quite fearful, what triggered that situation?
Well, that's an interesting question, because there's also, so because I'm in recovery from drugs and alcohol, and I still attend 12-step meetings, it is an interesting shared commonality between people in recovery, ADHD or not, is this sense of fear that everybody's had. So this nervousness, which I could maybe boil down to like nervous system regulation issues. But no matter what, I mean, it's much better today, but it was always this fear of something not working out. And even if it did work out, and then I got the evidence that it did work out, like I'll give you an example. I was always terrified of getting lost.
Okay.
But I had never been lost. So when I would go on a school trip, I remember being on the bus and I would count the buildings that we were going by in case I got lost and I had to find my way back. Like these situations that would just never happen. And then I started to watch horror movies when I got older. And then I was terrified of being kidnapped. So I would have my escape route out of the house. And it was just always a lot of kind of fantasy and impending doom for no clear reason.
Yeah, I hear you, but there must have been something that specifically must have triggered the fear in you. I'm just trying to find. Sorry, I'm very curious. I'm a very curious person. If something doesn't, my spider senses start tingling, I'll start thinking, okay, so where did that come from? Because you never progressively had the fear coming through you from when you was young. It's one day or 1 week or 1 month, this fear rose into you. So I'm just thinking, did something happen within your life that put the fear in you, and then your imagination just always then from that point started running riot, if that makes sense?
I remember it quite young though. Like I remember even in kindergarten, and I was always a year. I had been put into school early because my birthday's in November and the cutoff date here is September. So I got pushed in a year early. But I always remember, even in kindergarten, feeling very fearful. The best answer, or the best answer that I have thought of where that came from is that I never felt like emotionally safe in my home. Wonderful family, wonderful home, wonderful, you know what I mean? But I never felt like I could sit down with somebody and tell them how I was feeling. You know, a lot of it was outside appearances. Just make sure you look good, make sure the home is immaculate, make sure your hair is done or your outfit's done, and then everything will be okay. But I had a lot of big feelings compared to the rest of my family members who just seemed a little bit more robotic almost.
I see.
So I don't think I knew where to put those. So I think a lot of that was cooking on the inside.
Yeah, no, I see that. So it's a situation you was quite hypersensitive with your feelings. And so trying to understand as just a young kid, so you did have issues with fear because you had hypersensitivity from even before kindergarten, because you can't remember way back to the crib. But I would suggest probably even you've always had that hypersensitivity. And with that, you was more sensitive to certain situations, and hence you watching films or being in a situation going on a coach or etc. etc. And as you got older, with experience, you understand life isn't as safe as it usually is. Then it usually hits around about the age of 7 onwards, and then you start understand the realities of life, and that hypersensitivity with the realities of life, and the innocence being lost. That's what gradually makes things worse. Or am I just going in the wrong direction?
No, I don't think you're too well, I think everybody's experience is quite subjective, but I mean, if we're going to make more objective statements, definitely, like we need to look at like when the ego forms, and you know what type of household people grow up in. So everybody has this different experience, but it never necessarily, the amount of threat that I felt never matched my reality. So I knew it was, but yes, you nailed it with the hypersensitivity. I've been called sensitive my entire, it's only something I would say in the past like 8 years that has started to subside for me.
And is that because you were diagnosed with ADHD, you've then accepted you got ADHD, and then there's not much to fear from, or not?
No, I don't think. It was more the hypersensitivity started to go away when I couldn't make a decision in the past without, because when I got sober at 21, I was basically restarting my life, and it felt like I was a 13-year-old in a 21-year-old's body. So I didn't have a lot of the things that my friends had. I didn't have an education. I didn't have a driver's license. I didn't have an apartment. I didn't have all these things. So I felt a lot of shame about that. And then I was on this like fast track rebuilding process. And because I was newly sober at the time, I couldn't trust myself, or I told myself that I couldn't trust myself. So
Uh-huh.
it was a many years of doing the same thing over and over again and gaining stability in my life, gaining sobriety, abstinence, time away from drugs and alcohol, proving to myself that I could do certain things. And then it was at around 30, I realized, like, I'm working at a job that I don't really want to be at. I'm asking people's opinions when I kind of already feel like I know what I want to do myself. And I started to trust myself more. And that's when I went on like a strictly kind of entrepreneurial path.
Mhm.
But what happened with that path was I didn't know enough about my ADHD at the time. So my organizational skills were terrible. I would start 20 projects and do them all at 20%. I was all over the place. And then I would fall so far behind, I would be completely paralyzed. The mountain would be so big, I couldn't do anything. So then I had to learn about all of that. And then once I learned about that, I was able to kind of combine all of these skills and just learn how to manage better. And my supervisor at the clinic helped me a lot with that. She's like, your brain is a superpower. You just need to know how to use it better.
That's right. Totally. It's your brain is just different. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just different. So you just have to learn how to use it for your purpose.
Yep.
Yeah. And I suppose that's difficult for you to actually encapsulate in your mind because you've been feeling completely different as you've been growing up. And so part of you thinks that you was as scatty, crazy, whatever the case may be. And now you have to try to get out of that thought process to admit, so there's nothing really wrong with me. I've just got to do my thing.
Yeah.
Does that feel right in what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly. I really did not want one more label. It was the last thing that I wanted. I did not want one more professional telling me what was wrong. I just felt so frustrated. I was like, oh my God, can I just catch a break here? I just want to be normal. Until I also found out that there's no real normal. Like, even if you're not neurodivergent,
That's
you
right.
struggle with your own stuff
correct.
in your own way. So
yeah. I would suggest that the normal is not being normal. That is normal. Not being normal. Everyone is different. There is no one the same. And that's the point. We used to go into an institution, an educational institution, where it says, this is what you must do. This is how it must go. And if you can't do that, then obviously there's something wrong, and so on and so forth. And we were supposed to be different. After all, if we were all the same, Jesse, can you imagine if everyone was an Eli? Oh my God, what chaos! Oh, don't want to.
Couldn't handle it. I couldn't handle it.
No, exactly. No. Having all Eli's is not good.
No.
So this is why it's so important for us to be unique, and it's okay for us to be unique, and we should celebrate being unique. And I think that is where we can be successful in life, not only in partnerships, our personal partnerships, but in business. You don't have to be like the person next to you. And the problem is, if you try to be, then they've got someone to compare to, because if you're the same, who's cheaper? While if you're very unique and you seem to know what you're doing, and in a unique way and in a practical way, well, they're more likely to go with you, be you more expensive or cheap or whatever the case may be, because they resonate with you and they trust you. And it's important to generate trust. So, So going back to you, what mechanisms, tools have you put into place to help manage how you want to be? Does that make sense?
Yep. Number top of the list is diet and exercise.
Really?
If I don't exercise, I'm a different person. I'm a different person from one day to the next. it's and I'm not talking about like vigorous weight training. It doesn't have to be any specific type, but I move my body every single day. And if I have a big day, I move my body first thing in the morning because it aligns my brain. It's like putting on a new pair of glasses after. And when I don't, it's incredible. I mean, I can still function if I don't, but not as well as I do when I exercise. And I went down a complete rabbit hole around processed flour and processed sugar. And it's on the ADHD brain. And again, I'm one person from the next when I eat. So I have a very unprocessed diet, and eat that type of food. I have brain fog. I have anxiety. I'll have symptoms of depression. I can't concentrate. So when I keep my food clean, and I exercise, I'm laser focused.
That's really interesting. And I suppose that's, you can't go wrong with exercise, right? But obviously, it helps you so much. It's something that you have to have in your routine. What else? So we've got the situation that you've got the exercise, your diet when it comes to processed foods. And I know processed foods are quite dangerous to all of us, and not just to us that are neurodivergent, because obviously we know what's in sugar, right? Sugar basically is a poison, but we'll leave that conversation for another day. I won't go down that rabbit hole. So we have the exercise, which is very important. You do that. I take it twice a day. You do that in the morning, definitely 100% of the time, and sometimes in the evening, or all the time in the evening.
Not in the evening, because if I work out too late, then I'm too stimulated and then I can't go to sleep. So I actually stay away from evening exercise. So I've come to realize that my bad time is usually around like 3 or 4 p.m. Where my brain starts to tell me, I wake up very early, and I'm a morning person, and I feel like very good in the mornings. So if I have a lot of work to get done, my ideal is to work from like 6:30, 7 a.m. till like 3 p.m. Because my brain does not work that well after 3 p.m. And I used to try to take a nap at that time because my brain would tell me that I was tired, but my body wasn't tired. It was just my mind that was tired. So that's when I'll do like a really big walk from like 3:30 to 4:45. It takes me like an hour and minutes.
Yeah, that is a walk.
Yeah.
Why don't you go for a run? Make it shorter.
Yeah. I love running. Running does not love me anymore. My knee hurts, my back hurts. It's very I think I've beaten the crap out of my body with like CrossFit and training. I've had 2 shoulder surgeries, so running does not anymore. No. So I love a good walk. I listen to podcasts, and it's so interesting because I'll leave the house in one mood. I'll feel down. I'll feel tired. My brain will tell me, oh, just relax on the couch, and maybe you could get some junk food tonight and you don't need to. And I'm like, nope. And then I'll go for a long walk, and then I'll come back, take a shower, and I'm completely aligned again. So I could continue working. I could go out. I could go see friends. But I need to have that exercise break in between.
So you make sure that you put things in place to manage your ADHD, because it's very important for you to be able to live the life you want, to function in the way you want, and to manage your jobs and everything else. And what is it like for personal relationships? So we know you put these things in place so you can function a certain way, but when it comes to personal relationships, how does the ADHD affect you, if ever?
Oh, it definitely did. And I didn't realize it at the time. So before, I'll just talk about like my friendships, like platonic relationships first, where I would be like very excited to see somebody. But then I realized that if they weren't in front of me anymore, or I wasn't with them, I could just almost like forget about the person and just go on with whatever it was. So I wasn't great at maintaining the friendships, and then I would get very involved, or I would go on another tangent with something else, and it would isolate me. And then I actually had a lot of friends they used to call me ditcher in my 20s, because I would like organize parties or get-togethers and then I wouldn't show up.
Oh, really?
So that was, yeah, that was when I was still struggling with a lot of the fear. I would have a lot of fear of like leaving the house, or like what was going to happen, or maybe I wasn't going to have fun and I was going to want to leave, and maybe I should just not go. So I actually started to isolate quite a bit. And then I had a few friends confront me on it. And then I actually had to start to pay closer attention to who I was surrounding myself by. There was a lot of people that I've just changed a lot over the years, and I've grown a lot over the years, and not everybody was on the same path. And I would leave hanging out with certain people, and we would be like talking about the past, or they would be like gossiping or whatever. And I didn't feel good. I didn't feel like, it didn't feel positive. It didn't feel encouraging. So I actually had to stop hanging out with quite a few people, and that was difficult. But I want to be around people. But the better I got to know myself, the more I was able to tell people what I needed.
Okay.
You know, like I used to have a good friend come over, and she'd be like, "It's so silent in your house. Why is it so quiet in here? Why don't you have any music on or a movie on?" I said, "Because if I have music on or a movie on, I'm not going to listen to you. I can't have anything like distract me on the side, because I'm gone. I can't focus on the two things at once. It's not going to work well." So I just got to know myself at a deeper level, and what I needed, and where I felt safe, and personalities that I enjoyed. It has impacted my romantic relationships quite a bit, and that's taken me many years to understand. That's been a journey in itself. I don't like to spend a lot of time with the same person, and not everybody appreciates that. So that's been,
that's difficult, because men in general, they do like to be selfish, and they like the women to be on their coattails and whatever. So that's men, not all men, but there's a lot of men that prefer that, you know. And if you're an independent woman that's very independent and doesn't need a man, it then becomes a problem, which is not the woman's problem, that is the man's problem.
That's it.
So, exactly. So you are who you are. You just have to find the right man that is comfortable with himself, that doesn't need a woman on his coattails. So, and did you ever work that out from what I've just said?
What do you mean work? Like,
did you work out that it's the man's fault has to, rather than you feeling bad that you're not giving him enough time, or not on his case all the time, and giving him all the attention 24/7? Was it a situation you was guilty for some time, or did you realize straight away, "Oh, that's your problem, you know, I'm okay with my space, we shouldn't have to be with each other 24 hours a day"? How did that go? What was the situation?
In my 20s, no, I didn't understand that. So I was either finding myself in these very codependent relationships, which didn't feel good, or I would find someone who was also too hyper independent, and then that would cause problems because we were never on the same page. But then once I got into my 30s, everything shifted. I felt a lot more confident, and I'm lucky because my mom has never been one of those mothers that's like, "Oh honey, like you just need to find a husband," and this, like, she's always empowered me. She was like, "Do your thing, be yourself." Like, so I've never felt, and I'm just not the type of person who settles. So if you're not adding to my life, I don't feel the need to continue into something that doesn't feel good or worth it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very comfortable on my own. My business is successful. I travel. I have huge community around me of friends and families and coworkers and all this stuff. So I don't feel definitely when I was more insecure, I went through the what's wrong with me, or maybe it's because I'm sober or I have all these issues or this or that. But now that I work with hundreds of people, like everybody has their issues and nobody's getting out of that one. And now it's just really more finding somebody compatible. I also work with so many people who will tell me in session, they knew walking down the aisle, they were making a mistake. They knew 30 years ago, this was not the person for them. I've watched so many people stay in unhappy, unhealthy relationships. And to me, that's poisonous. And I'm okay with being single versus that.
Well, that's good. You've got to a stage where you know yourself, what you need and who you are, and confident enough that you're enough, right? You don't need anybody else to validate you, which is really, really important. And listeners, I would say this is really important. You shouldn't have to have someone else validate you to be who you are. Who you are should be enough to be who you are, so you have the right person in your life. If you're always trying to validate yourself and that person with you doesn't accept you for who you are, then you're with the wrong person. And anyway, that's my belief. I don't know what you think, Jess, but I believe that myself.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, it's just the way it is. You've gone through quite some turmoil. It's quite difficulty not knowing who you are when you was young. That hypersensitivity, I can only imagine, was a nightmare because you felt you was completely different from everybody else, be that in the house, be that with your peers, and anywhere else. And the isolation must have been quite intense. Is that correct?
Very, very. That's when it got scary, to this point of like really deep stages of depression. I just didn't know what to do anymore. And I almost felt guilty because like I said earlier, I grew up in a good home. I had the support. I was able to get an education. I was put in sports. Like, I didn't necessarily have a reason to not feel good or complain. So I also felt like, man, I have so much, but I feel so bad inside. And I care so much what other people think that it's ruining my life. It's taking over. So yeah, that was a really tough. And then I would get poked fun at for being sensitive. So then I was getting sensitive about being sensitive. Oh, you're so sensitive. Oh, you need to let it go. Oh, you just need to turn it off. And I was like, it doesn't turn off. Because if it turned off, I would just turn it off. I don't want to be, spinning. But I mean, I would hold on to things like, if somebody didn't say bye to me at a party, or if I thought my boss was mad at me back in the day, I would think about these things for days. Thank God I don't.
I'm telling you, because it must to you, it's like noise 24/7, right?
24/7.
Oh my God, I do feel for you. Not easy at all. Okay.
Now it's good noise. So now it's like excited noise. Like, I've learned what makes me feel alive and creative, and I know how to stand up for myself and tell people what I need and ask for help and listen to my intuition and rest when I need to rest and push when I need to push. So it's way better now. But for a long time, it was just like
big issue.
Yep.
I get you. Let's talk about your business. So when you help people or peoples, bad English, by the way, listeners, and when you help people, do you also help groups? Do you also go corporate? I mean, just give us the spans of the type of structure within your business, so the amount of people that you potentially can help?
Yeah, for sure. So right now it's mostly individual. And I never thought I would say this, but it's gotten so full that I will probably need to start moving to group soon. I also fundamentally believe in the power of group therapy and group coaching because of what I witnessed personally and professionally in the treatment center. I think a lot of people have this idea of like, oh my God, I could never share that in front of a group of other people. But there's magic that happens when you have, 10 to 20 people going through the same thing you are, and being vulnerable. So right now, to answer your question, I only do individual work. I am moving into couples coaching soon, to help couples be able to communicate better based on their attachment styles. So that's coming up. And my bigger focus before groups is to start to make a lot more educational content. So I love making content. I love doing the podcasts. I'll be moving to YouTube soon to just make content that's available, because not everybody has the luxury to be able to hire a coach or hire a therapist. So I've got a lot of good feedback on my blog writing and the reels that I make so far. So I'd love to do more of that. But yes, in the future, a group will be coming, just because there's only so many hours in a day and you can only see so many people. So yeah, groups are fun.
All right, great. And just give me a warm story, the hardest story that started at the beginning for someone that had an impossibility. There's no way they can come out of that hole. Just give us how you've helped that person, a really difficult situation, and just give it to us.
Like, you mean a client that I've helped?
Yes, someone that you've helped.
Oh, I definitely have one. There was a person, it was about 2 years ago. And I don't work with addictions as often anymore. When I was in that industry, by the end of it, I felt like, okay, I was ready to move on. Because as you can imagine, the percentage of people that get sober is not super high. But it was actually somebody that I had known from the past who reached out for help. And this person was drowning. They were trying to run a business. They were trying to dissolve a marriage. They were drinking and using and just completely dysregulated. And every time we would have a session, it would almost turn into like this like conflictual feeling of this person just being, and I knew it wasn't to me, but it felt like it was to me because they were just so mad all the time. And I just felt like we were getting nowhere. And I started to feel really off after the session, and he would just be like screaming and angry. And it was just so different from everybody else I was working with. And then they started to get a little bit, I introduced them to somebody else to mentor them in a recovery program, and just did not have high hopes. Anyways, we had stopped seeing each other, and then the person reached out to me to invite me to his 1-year celebration of sobriety, and his parents were there, and his dad came up to me and he was like, thank you so much for never giving up on him. And I watched him up there, and he was a completely different person. Like, he spoke differently, he dressed differently. I was just like, whoa. And I always want to have high hopes for people, because I do fundamentally believe that people can change in very big ways. But the pushback from him was like, I was like, oh God, this is going to take years if anything. And now he's doing super well and super calm. And so that was a big one.
It's very difficult, isn't it, to see someone that's destroyed, completely different from when it comes to addiction from what they used to be. And it's very sad and quite shocking at the same time.
Yeah. I used to have a coworker that used to say he was another counselor at the treatment center. And he said, don't put your expectations too high with clients, because people struggling with drug addiction or alcoholism will fight for the right to stay sick. And I've never forgotten that he said that. And it rolls through my mind all the time. And it's true, right? You take a heroin addict, for example, and they know it's killing them. They know they've pushed everybody away and they have no money but they're going to fight for the right to stay close to the substance, because the fear of who they are what they face after you take that substance away is it's a big ask. So yeah, it's definitely people who can work in that industry for a long time, I give a lot of credit to, because it's hard. You're seeing somebody right in withdrawal. You're taking away their teddy, essentially their blankie, and yeah, you're gonna see the uglier parts of them come out first, for sure.
And that's the difficulty for them and you hit the nail on the head, them accepting who they are. And because they see what they've done is quite ugly, that's a really tall ask for anybody, to be honest. But it's the only way to forge forward and just improve their lives, or our lives, or whatever the case may be. And it is just being able to look at the mirror and just accept who you are. And even when you don't like who you are, then the second point is to try to have the courage to do something about it. And sometimes people have a look of who they are, they don't like who they are, and they go back into obviously what they were doing before. And I get that can't be easy if you've stolen from someone, or you've damaged something, or destroyed property and whatever, and then you've got to face that. So that's very different. I'm sure you've seen that over and over again, and would you say that's quite the hardest part of the process, is to accept who they are? Or is it another part of the process which is most difficult when it comes to trying to recover?
No, I wouldn't say that that's the hardest part in my experience and what I've seen. I think the hardest part is not stopping and facing, because if you are one of the fortunate ones that gets to go to treatment, if you think about it, you've got 3 to 4 months locked away, you're separated from drugs or alcohol, you've got therapy, a gym, fresh food, and a bunch of other recovering people to support you. So that can make it easier. It's not the stopping, it's the staying stopped. That's the trickiest thing. And I remember I used to be shocked. I'd see people with 5 years of sobriety and then they would relapse, and I'm like, oh my God, why would you do that? Blah, 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 right? Because somebody who wasn't struggling with addiction, they would put the two together. They would say, like, wait a minute, my life is a dumpster fire when I drink or use. Therefore, if I get sober, if things get better, I should stay sober. But I don't believe that's the way that the mind of somebody addicted works. It's this idea of, oh, I'm 5 years sober now. Look at everything I've done. I'm normal now. I'm healthy now. I should be able to have a glass of wine. I've thought it. A lot of my friends have thought it. And then I watch people go and they're like, oh, I had the glass of wine, nothing happened. And then the next weekend, maybe I'll try that again. And then they have 2 glasses of wine. And then the next weekend, they're like, oh, maybe I should do a little bit of Coke. Oh, maybe. And then they're gone.
Yeah.
I mean, I've watched people come back unrecognizable to the person that before. So I think a lot of people are quite resilient when it comes to facing things. And that's what I do appreciate about a 12-step program, is that there's 12 steps to help you process the harm that you've done, make amends, live a spiritual, stable life. It's a beautiful program. But I feel like, yeah, I mean, there are some people too where it's like it just depends, right? It depends on your support network. It depends on how honest you can be. But I believe people are quite resilient when it comes to facing their wrongs. But staying that way, that's why I've never left the program of recovery also, is because I don't want to forget what I was like almost 18 years ago. And I think it's pretty easy to forget. So I'd say that was probably the hardest part.
Yeah, staying in a state of, I hear you. Unfortunately, Jess, I've got to put the line in the sand. Otherwise, I could keep on speaking to you for a very long time.
I'll have to come back.
I think so. You make me smile, that's for sure. You did at the beginning. All right.
Good.
So can I ask you, how can people contact you if they need that help?
Yeah, for sure. So my website is the best place. So jessphillipscoaching.com. I can send you those details over. Maybe you can add it to the show notes.
Of course.
So my website explains what I do, who I help, the breakdown of the 10-week program. There's a contact form, which you can fill out directly from there. I also have my own podcast, the Living Out Loud podcast, as you can see behind me. So I try to put out a lot of free mental health educational content out there. And then on Instagram, also at Jess Phillips Coaching. You can always send me a message and enjoy, watch, read all the stuff that I put on there as well.
Okay, and listeners, not only can you reach her out at the podcast and listen to her on Living Out Loud, but as you can see, her journey is as such. The reason why she can support you mentally and support a couple mentally is because she's gone through the journey herself. As you can see, she's had to deal from childhood all the way through to today, the many dynamics of life where they can bring you down and stay you down. But she has been resilient, and thus she uses that to help other people, as you can see. So if she resonates with you, she's obviously the person for you, because she's actually lived that life that you're probably living now, that you're having difficulty with. So she's likely to understand where you're coming from and likely able to help you. So with that said, Jess, thank you for coming on board today. I really appreciate you being late. I really appreciate you being 2 minutes early, even though you was more than 2 minutes late, but I forgive you.
We've already gone through so much together, it's only been a day.
I'm telling you, I've never been abused like that and kept waiting. Can you believe it? What a cheek. I gave her an easy time today, didn't I? Well, maybe I should get her back on and then we'll have to test her and push her next time. We'll see. Only time will tell. But Jess, thank you for being with us and giving your wonderful time.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. It was super fun. Appreciate you having me on.
Thank you. And with that said, listeners, sayonara.